Hello everyone, this is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful, Rabbit Hole, Lore and Frey, and the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. I would really like to talk about the Nintendo Direct. I would really like to talk about all the great games we saw, all the great upcoming titles that are coming out in Nintendo Switch in the first half of 2023 and beyond. I would really like to talk about that, but first, we really need to clear something up in regards to what the gaming journalists are doing and what the investors are doing, or the analysts are doing, because all year long, it really does feel as if this is the year that the game journalists are going to try to make a comeback, they're going to try to strike back at Nintendo, and they're going to try and downplay the Switch in order to usher in the glorious new age of PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, or I should say the Xbox Game Pass, because the Xbox console brand is essentially dead at this point. The glory days of PlayStation 5 are upon us, according to the gaming analysts. In fact, they're already here, because I have already seen a number of articles, from gaming journalists claiming that PS5 is obviously the most successful platform on the market right now. Switch is on a massive downturn, and Nintendo just can't possibly compete. Investors are getting wary. They're getting concerned about the lack of new upcoming hardware. They're concerned that Nintendo Switch, a console that sold 122 million units, the third best selling console unit of all time, is suddenly going to fall off a cliff and stop being supported and stop making money. This is the stupidest thing in the world. And I would like to call out Takashi Mochizuki of Bloomberg, leftist propaganda network, and Daniel Ahmed, the PSN makes more money than all of Nintendo guy. These guys, I swear, these are the new Michael Pachters, okay? Okay, 10 years ago, Michael Pachter became a meme because of his insistence that Nintendo was making poor decisions, that they were on the way out, when they were really in a new golden age of Iwata's leadership, of the Wii and the DS era. Nintendo is doomed. PS3 and mobile is gonna stomp it. And of course that never happened, and it became obvious that his ridiculous predictions were never going to come true. Even now, it's kind of interesting to see that this guy still has his Pack Attack show going, making wild claims about how Nintendo needs to release new pieces of hardware every 2 years in order to remain relevant, or something like that. These other guys, people like Mochizuki, they are of the same mold. And I really do think the community really needs to start calling these people out, because Nintendo Switch sales are not declining. They are going down after the all-time high point of 2020, in which, Animal Crossing New Horizons, which is the best-selling exclusive title on Nintendo Switch, possibly ever, of all time, released in 2020. Right, which led to a huge explosion of sales and popularity for the console, and now the console isn't becoming irrelevant or obsolete or selling significantly less. It's just not at that all-time high point anymore, because Animal Crossing is one of Nintendo's biggest IPs. That has a big cross appeal across all sorts of demographics and groups of people. There is no denying that Animal Crossing New Horizons was extremely successful. However, the fact that, just the simple fact that, there hasn't been a major new release like that on that level since then, that doesn't necessarily mean that, the Switch is on the decline. You know what I mean? That's just a testament to how strong of a brand Animal Crossing it actually is. In a way, it's almost bigger than Pokemon, right? It is just phenomenal to see that game journalists and analysts, IGN is doing articles about how this was a dismal year for Nintendo, when during an analyst report where they confirmed that the Switch has become the third best selling console of all time, beating out the PS4 and the Game Boy. It's interesting seeing the spin and the damage control and the downplaying, because this is real talk, a really big issue for them, going forward, is that people are starting to fall out of the AAA sphere, right? People have stopped paying as much attention to big AAA games like Forspoken and Final Fantasy 16, and are drifting more to low budget titles that are exclusively on Nintendo Switch, right? like we are seeing that like notable shift in that like big shiny AAA productions aren't necessarily bringing in audiences like they used to. We've seen this with we saw this with Callisto Protocol, we saw this with Saints Row, we saw this with Forspoken, right? Like it's been like a reoccurring trend over the past couple of years, over the past decade or longer, I would say, is that games are getting worse. And unlike a decade ago, in which like the general public wasn't really aware of this and was like consuming all these products anyway, we are reaching the point where like the general public is getting really tired of the same rehashed concepts, meant to appeal to like a mass audience over and over and over again. It's much like what's happening with like the Marvel movies and the superhero genres in film right now, is that like, it was extremely popular at the time, in the 2007 to, up to Endgame, right? From Iron Man to Endgame, but now it's like the entire thing is like played out and boring and people are looking for like something new, interesting, and exciting. Products that are essentially only offered on Nintendo Switch, because this year has been phenomenal for Nintendo already with Fire Emblem Engage and everything else that's come out in the recent past, like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. It's just been like a crazy like start to the year for Nintendo, and I just don't see them slowing down anytime soon. And I don't see a single person talking about it. Like the only person who I've like straight up seen condemn analysts and people speculating on like the soon to be announced Switch 2 is like Stuttering Craig of all people, like someone who isn't even really in the industry anymore, who's just doing live streams for fun. He knew what's up, like me. He understands that like Nintendo is making a ton of money on the Switch right now, and there's absolutely no reason to replace it whatsoever. But like the analysts, the YouTubers, the gaming journalists, they really need Switch to get out of the way, because with Switch like having such a big head start and still continuing to do extremely well in the wake of a new console generation that it wasn't even released in, this is downright dangerous for them. We are risking like PlayStation and Xbox losing a lot of their market share, and a lot of the propaganda that PlayStation was built on is that like it was like this adult like video game console for adults that had like blood and gore and sex. It's not like really all that true anymore. Like more and more we're seeing like a lot of the same games coming out on Nintendo Switch. Like how much longer can like the narrative that Nintendo censors their games really stay relevant in 2023 when that hasn't been true since like Mortal Kombat 1 in the 90s, the early 90s actually. Like that's been a conspiracy for 30 years that hasn't really been true in any way, shape, and form. But it's persisted because gaming journalists, YouTubers, and like PlayStation needs that image to stay afloat. They need you to think that like Nintendo is old, tired, irrelevant, and like just rehashes their IPs over and over and over again. But that simply isn't true. As anyone who's played like Breath of the Wild can tell you, like this is the only video game company in the world that can successfully not only like innovate on their pre-existing like established IPs, but like consistently put out new ones. Like Splatoon is still relatively new. We have stuff like ARMS in recent memory. We have like stuff like Xenoblade. Fire Emblem has exploded in popularity. Like you get all of these games that are just bangers, and more we're seeing like older games, stuff like from the N64 and Game Boy eras are becoming like more widely available on Nintendo platforms. And more, I think it's becoming like the narrative that like the gaming journalists have built up over the past 25 years, that like the N64 had no games and Nintendo has been dead ever since PlayStation came on the scene. It is collapsing at the seams, and nobody wants to admit it. Like everyone thinks that like everyone wants to believe that Nintendo is running scared and that they're like in a bad place financially, and that they're not ever gonna like top the Switch ever, and that the Switch is gonna be like their last Hail Mary before they become obsolete and become a third party and like have to put out like a new console which will like do Wii U numbers or something. But it's not true. It's just not going to happen like ever again. Like those days are over. Honestly, like there's just no way at this point. Too many people love Nintendo and want to see them succeed to allow companies like PlayStation to influence them anymore. And that's kind of what I've been seeing like in the reception to this direct, because there are a lot of PlayStation fanboys, there are a lot of shills, there are a lot of gaming journalists who are trying to come out here and say that like, oh, that direct was mid, it's not very good. I've had one guy, the Absol, by the way, calling you out, you little, you degenerate. Like the Absol claiming that like the financial report was so poorly received that Nintendo's stock prices crashed, which wasn't actually true at all. And like it just goes to show you that like the people who are railing against Nintendo, who are like hating on Nintendo, they're getting more and more desperate. You know, I've seen this over the past couple of days, like that double whammy with that like amazing financial report and like that amazing direct has like completely crushed the narrative that has been like built up all year. Like remember like in January where like people were releasing statements about like how Tears of the Kingdom would be the last Switch game ever and that like Nintendo would unveil like Switch 2 by the end of the year. Hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. We would have heard about it by now, you know, with this direct, right? There would be like some indication that like the Switch was on the way out from Nintendo or from some other company, but like that hasn't happened. The only people talking about Switch 2, the future of Switch, the future of Nintendo consoles, are gaming journalists because they don't want to acknowledge the fact that Switch, despite its age, despite its alleged weak hardware, is dominating the consoles. This is the Game Boy of the modern era, in which a technically inferior console is delivering a superior experience because of its price point, because of its superior games, its superior library, its functionality. It's like, it's just, you know, quality as a gaming peripheral. You know, you can bleat all you want about like how gaming PCs are superior, but like when you think about it, you can put together like a budget PC and then buy a Switch for like less price than you would have in like building like a high budget like gaming rig, right? Like that's the reality of the situation. You know, like, you know, I buy Fitbits and stuff like that. I've experimented with like, you know, different pieces of technology that like, you know, phones can have. You know, I have a Kindle, right? You know, even though you can technically use Kindle on your phone, I prefer like carrying a Kindle around with me because of like, you know, it's designed for what I'm using it for. You know, like being a constant reader, like trying to read all the time. Like that is, you know, a specific piece of technology that's successful because it appeals to people like me who have need of it. You know, even though you can technically get that experience from more commonly accessible pieces of hardware. And that's the reality of the situation, is that like Nintendo is dominating the console sphere right now. The people who are saying that like it can't compete with PlayStation and Xbox, with phones, with PC, like they don't understand that like Nintendo is essentially still to this day living out their like a blue ocean strategy. They don't openly talk about this all that much, but Nintendo is not in competition with Steam, PlayStation, or Xbox. They are a dedicated video game distribution platform. They produce new, interesting ways to play games on their own interesting, unique pieces of hardware that are affordable and obtainable for, you know, mass audiences. And the Switch is one of the best ever examples of one of their success stories. You know, and nobody wants to admit it. Everyone wants the Switch to go away so they can start ragging on Nintendo again, but it simply is not going to happen.